Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Kevin Yaudes. I'm a faculty member at McNeese State University, and this year I am the mental health content expert for the University of Louisiana system. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kayla Allison. Dr. Allison is the owner and Associates Counseling and Education Services. She's a licensed master social worker in the states of Louisiana and Arkansas and possesses extensive experience in the fields of behavioral health, substance use, and HIV/AIDS. Dr. Allison holds the Academy of Certified Social Workers credential, which is the most recognized and respected social work credential. She also holds a certificate in sexual abuse trauma from the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress. She received her Doctor of Philosophy in Social Work and Master of Social Work from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology from McNeese State University in Lake Charles. She's a member of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, National Association of Black Social Workers, National Association of Social Workers, and the National Minority AIDS Council. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Allison.
Thank you, Dr. Yaudes, for such an amazing introduction. Welcome, everyone, and let me begin by thanking you for inviting me to be on a panel to discuss such an important dialogue. I don't think it's a dialogue that happens as often as it should. So this platform hopefully will definitely increase everyone's knowledge and the importance of why we need to have such discussions about Black mental health. So just to begin, I know that it's after lunch, so I will definitely work my hardest to keep your attention because, again, I think this is a dialogue that is definitely overdue. But I always find it important to kind of explain the difference between mental health and mental illness, because there's this idea that anytime mental health is mentioned, everything is automatically categorized as a mental illness. And particularly in the Black community, that is a conversation that often gets confusing, and as it also impacts people's ability to kind of talk about and share those things, how they're feeling because of stigma. Because if I say something, they're going to think that I'm crazy, and who wants to be considered crazy? Okay, so just to kind of explain the difference, when we talk about mental health, we kind of talk about an individual's their ability to maintain productivity and like daily activities and maintain fulfilling relationships. Also, the ability to adapt with change and kind of cope with some of those stressors, particularly in Southwest Louisiana. We know, the last few years has just been devastating. So lacking the ability to cope has definitely impacted a lot of people here that come into the practice, as well as in just kind of daily activity in this area. Whereas mental illness, kind of occurs when there is kind of like an issue with the brain, or the brain, some people say, is not working properly. And those things tend to impact a person's 6 different function areas, thought processes, behaviors, things we do, kind of sealing our response to certain things that may be abnormal as opposed to someone without a mental illness. So I think it's important to explain those 2 things. So for the purpose of this presentation, again, the focus will be on mental health as opposed to mental illness, okay? So just to kind of give you a little background, again, on the importance of this conversation and why I jumped at the opportunity when Dr. Yaudes and Katie reached out, is because the numbers are showing with Black people, and I will use the term African Americans and Blacks interchangeably for the purpose of this presentation. So with Black people are more likely to suffer with persistent emotional distress, such as feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness. Also, Blacks are 20% more likely to report like severe psychological distress as opposed to their white counterparts. Yet only 1 in 3 African Americans or Blacks seek out treatment, okay? And those that do, they are less likely to remain in treatment, and they are less likely to get what we consider optimal care, adequate treatment, whether it's medication management, for different reasons. And we kind of explore some of those systematic reasons why this tends to happen, and why some African Americans are more reluctant to seek out and utilization of medical treatment, with the exception of ER visits. And we'll talk about that as well. Also, and as I said, despite the findings, only 1 in 3 African American actually are in treatment. With African American women, it's interesting because I had a conversation with someone, with a colleague actually, about African American females and mental health treatment. So with African American females, due to say lower income, poor, a lot of households, African American households are female-ran households. So there comes the stress of not only raising the kids, as they say, bringing home the bacon, the stresses of finding childcare, affordability of childcare. I just read a study the other day. Actually, my husband pointed out to me, anytime there's a study saying, hey, look, can you listen to the study? And there's one with the increase in affordability of childcare. So imagine, for whatever reason, I'm a single mother, and that, the mother of 4 kids, head of household, the affordability of childcare. A lot of the African Americans elementary schools in this particular area, a lot of them don't offer childcare services, which I had no idea. Whereas some of your schools in predominantly white neighborhoods, particularly 3, I'm thinking of, they offer after-school care programs. However, in some of your lower income Black communities, there's no after school care. So imagine the stress. Where am I going to bring the kids? I have to work. I have to pay the bills, but I can't find childcare. And if I do, the affordability is just out of range. So we have all of these things going on as far as an African American female. And so someone made the comment the other day when we were talking about trauma with women. And a colleague shared with me that one of her colleagues said, Black women, y'all bounce back very well from trauma. So, well, we don't really bounce back, but because of comments like that and treatment that support those types of statements, we don't necessarily seek out mental health treatment because, again, there's a lot of bias. We do know research supports that African American women receives minimal treatment, as I said earlier, as compared to their white counterparts. We are more likely, if we go in with the same symptoms as our white counterpart, say, we are more likely to be labeled as drug seeking as opposed to someone who's really in pain. And I can't think of the study off the top of my head, but there's one study that shows 2 ladies, one African American, one Caucasian. The studies show that when they present same symptomology, the only thing difference was the race. The African American female was not given pain medication, although the pain level was rated at the same as her white counterpart. She was also labeled as drug seeking as opposed to the white counterpart. So imagine consistently going to care and that's the treatment you receive. The stress is there. I'm not going to bother. Why bother? Why bother? Unfortunately. So it's not that African American women bounce back from trauma faster than their white counterparts. When the treatment has been consistently negative, then again, why bother? Also, when we look at college students, Pew did an interesting study looking at African American college students compared to their white counterparts. And the findings came out that African American students all self-report, experiencing racism at the very moment of completing their applications. So now I'm accepted in particularly those are predominantly white institutions. And as an African American female that attended all predominantly white institutions, from actually kindergarten to completing at LSU, I honestly identified with some of those things. So African American females, they said that they've experienced racism while at the point of filling out their applications. And then once they're in there, there's the stress of maintaining financial responsibilities, whether it's completing applications, getting passed over constantly for scholarships that, of course, they are definitely qualified to receive. Also, the stressors of feeling like, the word that I hear all the time is overachiever. You have to work harder. You have the pressure to achieve because why? There's this magnifying glass on you because being an African American student. So there are those pressures that Pew found that impacts African American students, particularly females. Also, the suicide rate is the second leading cause for African Americans ages 15 to 24. And I can remember doing a presentation during COVID. So of course we had all these young girls who they're already having these suicidal issues and ideations, depressions going on. But now I'm disconnected from my networks, whether it's my friends, the school counselor, which that's a conversation I think is important too that I'm going to mention. So I'm totally disconnected. It's myself and this computer constantly. So the suicide rates and ideology for African American females actually increased. I think it was 12% during the time of COVID and isolation. Okay, also Black females ages grades 9 to 12, they were 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019 as compared to their white counterparts, the same age. We need to figure out why is that? Let's have conversation. And suicide, in the Black community, just because you're Black, everyone has this idea because someone is Black, we all have the same walk, we all have the same path. No, although we do have some shared experience, I call my collective culture experiences, is what I call it. Everyone's experience of being Black is different. And as a Black female, you go to certain jobs and someone that's non-Black, ask you a question, and as if they're wanting you to answer or speak or be representative for the entire race. It doesn't happen. I hate to, as people say, bust someone's bubble, but that's not the case because that happens a lot for African Americans. So what tends to happen is, so when we have these conversations about suicide in the Black community, there's this cultural thing to where Black people don't commit suicide, now, and I'm just, it's been funny here in a sense because there's this idea that's what people say. Black people don't kill themselves, white people kill themselves, Native Americans don't kill themselves, Hispanics don't, but because of this thinking and this dialogue being perpetuated within the Black culture, it hinders many from speaking out, for seeking help. Because again, it's embedded in you, it's taught in your culture that we don't kill ourselves. When I'm having these feelings, I'm not gonna go to someone because we don't do those things. Unfortunately, in the personal sense as well as professional, some young people just committed suicide because again, they felt like they can't talk to someone because again, Black people don't commit suicide, okay? Also, I've known, and again, I know this, that there's going to be a later webinar talking about mental health and the LGBTQ community. But I find it very important when talking about suicide in the Black community, that's also a dialogue that needs to be had as far as members of the LGBT community having suicide ideations because of that and not being able to be accepted, and to have a comfortable, normalized conversation about LGBTQ in the Black community, that as well can lead to, and it has led to successful suicide attempts in the Black community. Okay, so just to kind of go on, I want to throw out some statistics, and if no one has questions, I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about what I mentioned about kind of this shared cultural experience. So in the Black community, although I said everyone, is different, there are certain things that are shared, our traditions, our beliefs. And if you ask several people in the Black community, everyone has either a Medea, that's what they call their grandmothers, or Big Mama. I had both. The French side, it was Big Mama, and then the other side, it was Medea. So, so we have those things, we have these things to where everyone can tell you, especially from a large Black community, every holiday, what do we do after church? One side of the family, my dad's side was Catholic. So after midnight mass, everybody went to my grandmother's house with the egg fights. And then the other side, that was Church of God in Christ, after Sunday church, everybody on holidays went, and that's what we did as families. We got together. Family connections, when they say this African proverb, that it takes a village, we honestly live that experience, that it takes a village because, for example, if, You live in some of these communities are very close and tight knit. Sometimes some people don't actually go out too often in their communities. So we find out what's going on in the community from the community members, if that makes sense. For example, one thing that I noticed, if someone passes in the community, well, they might not have known the person that passed, but they might have known the person who passed grandmother, or friend. So respect is always shown. And that's something that we do in the Black community. So family connectedness is very important. Okay. So, but just as we have that collective experience on family, religion, spiritual, all of these things, there's also a side of it with involving, inequities, racism, and prejudice. Unfortunately, that is a collective thing that African Americans share as well. I had a conversation with someone, which I'm not going to get into details, but with this critical race theory. And I actually had a teacher cry. We had this conversation and she cried because she says the mental health of her and some of her colleagues with this negativity, with, unfortunately, some people not even understand what critical race theory is, unfortunately. And Eurocentric education, it's always been universal or normalized, meaning any history book you can look into, you're going to learn about, Jefferson, all of these amazing presidents. But when you get to talking about non-white, as one of my Native American friends says, we were the first people. We were the first people. And she attended school, I think, in the Elton area. She says, but, just to see one paragraph about my people in American books was we're savages. We scalp people. We are just these horrible people that no one wants to know. African Americans, I can kind of agree. So my school books as a child was we didn't learn about Marcus Garvey and all these amazing people. It was just, I kid you not, when you look into the books, when it was on the subject of slaves, you have maybe 2 or 3 pages and all you see are horrific images, a few whips on the back, and that's it. What about all these great American, African Americans that had a major impact? So imagine what that does to your psyche. So you're sitting in a classroom when you hear all the, kids are kids, but it starts at such a young age. And I think it kind of produces some of that historical trauma, okay, in Black students at such a young age, when the only images you're seeing of you, because it's not of these people, it's you. Your very existence, your very being is, if you're Native, you're savage. In African Americans, all we learned about is that we were beaten, that we were in chains, that we are enslaved. So what does that show us? That we are already beneath our white classmates. So imagine going through life being instilled, unfortunately, in these school base where it's a place of learning to prepare you for life, but yet all you're prepared to do is see what your people, quote unquote, were in history, but that's only history you know. So now here comes years later, critical race theory. And there's this idea that the only purpose of critical race theory is to show that white people were horrible to Black people. It's not. What about our history? What about the Native American history? What about the Trails of Tears? We have to learn all of this history, but by being selected, it does something to the mental health of young students. Anytime you have a young student, you're looking here and saying that, she's heartbroken because someone tried to rub her skin and the color didn't come off. Why should a child in elementary school be made to feel that she's less than because her skin is dark? So when you talk about this critical race theory, again, the focus is on, it should be pushed as an inclusive way of including everyone's history, as opposed to, as they say, is teaching Black people that white people were bad, and it's not. What about our other races? What about, we've had Asian people that are part of American history, Asian American history, of course, Native American. But again, When we push and perpetuate racism, it impacts the mental health and mental well-being of those on the end of the spectrum receiving this negativity. And that's kind of what's happening. Also, police brutality, what it does to the vicarious traumas, what I like to call it, vicarious racism. We see this a lot, and it definitely impacts the mental health of African Americans. It is in fact, during the increase of the police brutality, when things first came out, it was the increase of ER visits of African Americans with depression. It increased, and I want to get the exact, actually 11% increase per 100,000 ER visits relating to depression among African Americans, secondary to police brutality. And that is a conversation, unfortunately, that some people find extremely uncomfortable. However, the mental health impact is reason enough that we need to discuss it. For example, African-American families, we teach our kids, and I'm the mother of a son, he's an adult now, but I can remember when he first got his license, actually his driver's permit at the time. My husband and I sit him down. We have to have these conversations. And if anyone in the audience can relate to this, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. The 4D idea. There's this a concept of never ride 4D in the car, meaning yourself and 3 other friends. And actually, I would challenge that to kind of go down to 2D. Based upon what we're seeing. But the idea is you never ride 4D, because if a cop see you as a Black male in a vehicle with 3 of your friends, that's automatic pull over. And unfortunately, our conversations about 4D has had to extend to, again, 2D, teaching them what to do when you're stopped by the police officer. So you imagine a young person with a driver's license, going to school, going to the store, driving, and you're taught at such a young age, you can't have your friends, things that their white counterparts really kind of take for granted. It's normalized for them. We have to teach these things. So now you have a young man who is excited. There's a driver's license and they can drive and do things, but yet there's this fear always in the back of their head. Okay, if I'm stopped, what do I do? This is what I do. This is what I say. This is what I don't do. This is where I need to make sure the registration is there. Keep your driver license there. Always announce, hand on the steering wheel, hey, I'm getting my license now. Is that okay? I'm going to back pocket. And it might seem silly, but unfortunately, these are the conversations we have. So now let's look at the mental health of this young man, okay? So for one, there's anxiety, there's fear, and to be honest, depending upon if there was an incident, or even there was an incident, he's alone thinking, that's depressing. I can't go here. Why? Because I might get stopped. I can't be gone. Actually, and I'm saying young men, but I'm going to say young women as well, because we've seen several times, in the Bland case that, African-American females experience police brutality as well. And what does that do to individuals? I'm 50 something, and certain times where I'm driving, and I travel sometimes for work. When I was in my PhD program, I commuted from Lake Charles to Louisiana to LSU, and that's about a 2.5-hour drive. Well, there were times where I was on the road late at night, and what I had to do is I had 9 out of 10 times my husband, our best friend, on the phone while I'm driving late and dark, because again, you're always in the back of your mind as an African American. I have to do things a certain way because I know the consequence for me could be different. So mentally, can you imagine what that does to someone? I can remember my kids at a young age, a family outing at the beach, and they were on a wave runner, and the mental health of my husband and I on the beach, we couldn't do anything. They're out in the water. They were stopped. They were asking ridiculous questions. And once they were let go and came back to the beach to meet us, we literally had to put our emotions, to be honest, as a mother, I'm gonna say my hurt. My husband was more of anger and, feeling a certain way because you can't protect your kids, you're out there. But as a mother, It's hurtful when we can't go out and have a family day without something happen. Now, some may say it may have been racism. They have been doing something else. But I'm going to be honest. You know, it says when it looks like a duck, walk like a quack, and say duck, say quack, quack. 9 out of 10 times it's a duck, especially when you've experienced it. You know what it looks like. And that's the sad thing. And unfortunately, our kids are taught, whether by force or by parents teaching them, to look out for those things. But unfortunately, not enough of us have a conversation on how to identify mental illness. What is mental illness? I did a similar presentation at McNeese with the McNeese chapter of NAACP. And one young lady asked that question, said unfortunately she doesn't feel comfortable going to a white therapist based upon one experience. And I think it's important to have those conversations, because she asked me, how do I know when I need to seek help? I mean, what do I look for myself? So we have those conversations, and the analogy I used is said, okay, let me ask you this. If I was to say, go to my desk and get me that blue ink pen, you might come back with a stapler. No, thank you, but I need that blue pen, it's on my desk. Now you may come back with paper clips. And then I send you back and you constantly come back with the wrong thing. Or I compare that to mental health. If we don't know what we are looking for, we're not going to seek treatment. We're not. Because again, how do I know what I'm looking for? I had a client the other day. I said, what do you look like when you're angry? Oh, I'm pissed off. Okay. What does pissed off look like? Well, I just get so mad and frustrated. Okay. What does that look like? So to literally have her break down, what does your anger look like? Well, inside, I just get this tightness in my chest. My face gets so red and I clench my hands. I want to, okay, let's slow down. So I get a pen and paper, start writing those things down. Didn't get it at first. It's like, what's wrong, Dr. Alice? But in the end, she got it. So now every week I ask her, what was the score on your anger meter this week? So now she's able to identify that. So when she's feeling certain ways, say, this is anger. I know what that looks like. Okay, so what we need to do is start having conversations about, what does mental health look like? What is it? I might be angry, but in all actuality, it may be a defense mechanism because I was embarrassed or anxious about something. But until we identify, let's call operationalize that anxiety or that anger, we will not know what we're looking for with mental health. Also important in looking at mental health among African Americans, that reluctance of why they don't seek it. Prime example is kind of like when I mentioned about the young lady at McNeese. She went to a white therapist, and I know some amazing therapists who are white. So please don't I'm not minimizing at all. However, the reality is, people of color, particularly African Americans, there aren't many of us doing this work. And sometimes people can identify with someone that looks like them. Now, for example, when I mentioned early on about the experience of being Black, it varies between people, but we have this collective culture experience. That's one of them, in a sense, not with everyone. However, people feel comfortable sometimes going to someone they think that they can identify with, someone that looks like them, for fear of several things. But this young lady, it was fear of being judged, racism. I've had people come in here and, someone has said something to them and it crushed them and they stopped going to treatment, completely stopped going to treatment. We need to have more and support on every level of therapists of color. Now, can someone go to a non-African American therapist be successful? Absolutely. However, one of the main things, I was on a forum the other day that talked about the need for African American therapists. And it is an app, I think someone's in the process of creating, I'm not sure how to find African, and the overwhelming support and request was amazing to me. I'm not surprised because I've been in this field a very, very long time. And I do know that having someone that looks like you is, same thing with Native Americans. I have someone ask me, are you gonna hire a Native American soon? That's my goal. Someone of LGBT community, GT community, asthmatic is a trans person, female to male. I'm in communications with, and she can't wait. She says, I love you, Dr. Allison. I really do. But I want someone that I can identify with me. That's fine. Do I believe I have to walk a mile in your shoes to know the path you're on and where you're going? No. However, if it'll make you feel more comfortable, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we need to have more therapists, mental health providers of color, particularly, again, African Americans. Now, also too, because I also think that we need to understand the plight of African Americans when it comes to mental health. Because think about it, African Americans are a group of people whose, for example, European researchers said that our brain capacity was, very small. We weren't capable of learning, we weren't capable of high functioning skills as our white counterparts. I mean, the BMI, that was created as an exclusionary way of excluding Black people from everything. It was based upon European bodies. So what happens, you argue on your whole life in a European system that you're excluded from, to be honest with you. So we have to look at the history of mental health for African Americans. Also look at, back in the day in the correctional system, judicial system, when they created this, what was the study of the super predators and all these things, and primarily it was good to our African American young men. So what does that say? You already have these negative things in American history, exclusionary policies. We know that there's a connection between poverty and mental health. Okay, so let's look at poverty with African Americans. The poverty level, housing, school systems. We don't get as considered the master teachers. We don't get. I mean, I know one school, they were actually borrowing books from a predominantly white institution. So you're getting these old books. So what does that tell me? If you're going to give me the worst of the worst, what does that tell me about what you think of me as a Black student or as a Black person? I think we have to look, I know, we have to look at the plight of Black people in this country and how some of those historical adversities impact contemporary position of Black people right now. We have to look at socioeconomical, sociopolitical, look at some of these policies. I believe in social determinants of health. And just as they apply to medical, they apply to mental health, housing. How many, and I can actually count on one hand, and let me correct myself, in Southwest Louisiana, this area, how many communities, I think there's one here, community mental health centers, that employ African American mental health providers. We don't have many. We have to look at some of these historical medical mistreatments, conspiracy theories, all of that play into why a lot of African Americans are reluctant to seek mental health treatment. Look at, although Tuskegee was not mental health, it played on their mental health. Okay, and it continues to play on the mental health thought process of African Americans seeking treatment in Eurocentric systems. And again, with the Tuskegee experiment, if some of you don't know what that is, it was it's a syphilis study, kind of what they tell. They did not tell African American males in Macon, I think it's Georgia, Alabama, they didn't tell them that there was a treatment for syphilis. So what happened is they continued to not treat these individuals, tell them they have bad blood. That's a thing too in the Black community too. So there are also some of these cultural things, the terminologies, bad blood, what is actually syphilis. So for years, it went on, they were treating bad blood, and they intentionally did not give it for treatment to Africa. Penicillin had been invented, but they were not giving it to why? We wanted to see the effects of syphilis on African Americans' health. All right, so you impact the mental, so imagine the whys, or even these individuals, the mental impact it had on these individuals and the community. So now here we are, which was the longest, the longest study in American history, went on for years. And who was spearheading and funding? The American government. So now I'm going to the American government for my mental health treatment and everything's supposed to be fine. No, So I think that until we understand these historic adversities, we're going to continue to see African Americans being at the top of the worst when it comes to mental health treatment. Unfortunately, sometimes it leads over to medical mistreatment. Well, to them, it's mistreatment of medical treatment and their reluctance to access services. Also, we can't go on without talking about, even some of the housing. So we know about the redlining that went on. So those that are in poor communities, look at the housing, the value of the land. So intentionally, Black people were left out of the nicer neighborhoods. What happens? More money going to nicer neighborhoods. What happened? There's more access to services in nicer communities. Why? Because money is being filtered in. But if the government sets up a system to redline and draw these maps, we can't let Blacks get to this area. We're not going to have them go to our schools. We're not going to do so. What happens? You have the worst schools, the worst housing, lack of access to medical treatment. We know, thank God, Louisiana is one of those states that expanded Medicaid. I mean, I literally saw people living longer. At the time, I was in the field of HIV and AIDS, and those that didn't have care, couldn't afford the care, were kind of plummeting health-wise. But now with expansion, people can get those things. So now let's expand some mental health treatment, particularly in the Black communities and with the inclusion of Black providers. We're not seeing that. So just kind of going on a little bit as far as what can we do to address these things? I've already said one. Let's create networks with these African-American providers where clients are feeling comfortable coming to African-American providers and discussing things. So as one person said, I'm not going to talk about not having certain things with white people. They're going to judge me, and in African-American communities, one of those cultural experiences, collective culture experience we talked about is there's this idea in the Black community that was taught at a young age. What goes on in this house stays in this house. So what tends to happen is I am not going to talk to this, Dr. Yaudes about what's going on in this household because they're just going to call those people in a sense. Because again, look at the history of African Americans in the mental health system. Unfortunately, our mental health at times was criminalized. Okay. Another example, behavioral health services, particularly say substance abuse, for example. We know with substance abuse, there's usually comorbidities, there's depression, something else going on. Well, in African American community, back in the days of, say Ronald Reagan, it was the war on drugs. Okay. So what happened? We go into these communities, destroy the whole family, families locked away, fathers locked away forever, moms struck, or kids are taken away, whatever. So now let's go here. We're in 2022, and it kind of started years ago, this big opioid addiction. Okay. So what happens to the response? There's one, I was traveling, I think in DC, presenting at a conference, and one person says, I'm upset because in this area, if a mother test is positive for opiates, she can keep her baby. She can go to treatment. Some treatments have the facility where babies can go and they can bond. So the baby's not losing out an important time of bonding with mom. Interesting. Now let's look at Black and Brown communities when this happens. So in Black and Brown communities, it's an addiction. We're going to criminalize addiction. We're going to lock everybody up. But now there's this opioid epidemic. All of a sudden, addiction is a disease. What do we do with diseases? We treat them. So when I'm getting treated for this behavioral health or this substance abuse issue, I'm also treating my mental health. I'm also, treating the depression that comes along with the anxiety and everything else. But what's happening to this person who has an addiction? It's criminal. Lock you up in don't know how small jail cells are, but we're gonna lock you in them anyway. We're gonna lock you in there. The only time you're gonna see me is when I go and bring you food. You may interact with somebody. Where's the mental health treatment? There's none. So I think as a society, and I know it's uncomfortable, I have always been a believer that we have to have these uncomfortable conversations if we want to see a change. Because if we're not having these uncomfortable conversations about, the history of African-American mental health in this country, hell, the history of treatment of African-Americans in this country, we're not going to know why they're so reluctant to access care. Why are they so reluctant to go to, the Dr. Yaudes and say, you know what, I'm having this issue going on. without saying, okay, this white therapist is going to take my kids from me. This white therapist is going to do all of these things. You know, as one person told me that I was working with in a Suboxone clinic, says, you know, you want me to tell you all the stuff, Dr. Alice. You're going to put all this in your little computer. And I can guarantee you, God's going to come knocking on my door. And what do you think is going to happen to my family? And again, I mean, we can have a conversation where, you know, things are different now and all this, but we have to work on that. It's a process that I don't think many mental health providers want to have, you know, because anytime, and you know, my background, I started at McNeese. I got about 85%, finished with my master's in psych and took a break, which turned into 10 years later. And then when traveling and working, I saw social work. That's where I need to be. So in coming back and doing this thing and working as a social worker, I can see all of these things I didn't see before. And in order to be effective, I had to have uncomfortable conversations. And I think that those of us in the field need to have these uncomfortable conversations as mental health providers, you know, because anytime you can go and again, I'm extremely passionate about what I do, if you can't tell, but I can remember going to one of my chapter meetings as a social worker locally. And everyone we have, it was, you know, standing house, always running to get there, leaving work to go for his lunch break and, you know, sit in these meetings. Well, for Black History Month, one of my colleagues was excited, had an amazing presentation on working with Black families. And I can guarantee you, and I know this for a fact because we had a conversation, there were no more than 5 white social workers in the room. Everyone else was African American. When previously, every month previously, standing room, and I know because I was rushing to get there on time, so I wasn't late. What does that say when African Americans are the greatest, the highest consumers of social services, yet not one, well, there were about 6 white service providers did not find it important enough to show up, to learn more about the population, how better to serve this population. Let's find about the family dynamics of this culture, this race, because we know that, you know, with African Americans, I can guarantee you, could be wrong, but I can guarantee you at some point, everybody had an uncle, whatever the name was, that stayed in the background, that lived with them. You know, that's how families are raised. You might have your family. In fact, my family, prime example, my father-in-law, maternal grandfather, my maternal grandfather always had a house. Always, since I was a kid, he babysat us, mom to work, but he always lived with us. Weird. My mom got married, and to my stepfather, it crushed him. He literally cried because he's like, my family's gone. Like, she's marrying that. Like, well, no, you're coming too. And he did. He kept his apartment, but he lived with us. You know, we built this house years later. He lived with us. And he lived down the street at his apartment because family connections are important. It's important for any service provider to understand family connection in the Black community. Because again, I might give you any information I can, but how amazing is collateral information from family that's been knowing and living and surrounded by my client. That's amazing to have. And I think that by learning more about the family dynamics, the church as well. I mean, the Black church has always been a staple in the Black community. And, you know, and I will be honest, sometimes I get on my little box and say, we have to do more, we have to do more. And hey, someone called the bluff and a preacher called me and I did a talk about the Black community and mental health. And one important thing that I told the pastor, I said, you know what, pastor, I'm sure you're amazing, but I'm going to tell your congregation, your pastor is not your therapist. And in the Black community, that's one thing that we do. We go to the church for everything, which is wonderful to have these conversations. But, you know, I also encourage them, make a referral to mental health provider because the church is a staple. What better way to reach these communities? Go to your church leaders, you know, have a conversation about mental health, you know, and also we need to normalize conversations about mental health, just as we normalize diabetes, obesity, Everything else we need to learn, and service providers need to remember the important things in Black communities, one being family connections, the pastor, spirituality, the church, and also, although uncomfortable. So in closing, I'm going to say also, although it may be uncomfortable to have this dialogue and conversations about the plight of African Americans in this country, we have to have it in order to be successful and to address some of the reluctance that you're gonna have with African Americans accessing these services. Because why? I go to the ER for this quick fix or whatever's going on, and then I'm going home. But what tends to happen is, because you're not getting to the root cause of this issue, this mental health problem, what's going on? The ER tends to be a revolving door for African Americans, because that's where a lot of the population seek mental health services. Now, are there exceptions to every rule? Absolutely. But I think that in order for us to be successful in treating and actually, to be honest, addressing mental health, because again, people confuse mental health with mental illness. And in the Black community, that's one thing, because why? We've never had dialogues like this. So what happens is, when something goes on, it's depression, it's stress, they don't seek treatment until things are exacerbated, and it starts impacting functioning in life. So I see there are a few questions, and I want to definitely leave some time. So I want to again thank Dr. Yaudes, thank Katie for reaching out, for having this conversation. And I hope it definitely continues. And I can answer any questions that you may have, or anyone may have.
Kevin, you're muted.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie. So while we wait for some questions in the chat, I just wanted to thank Dr. Allison for joining us today. And I certainly hope that this conversation continues as well. So any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Dr. Allison, we do have one question that's popped up. I'll read it to you if that's all right.
Absolutely.
I've learned that it's hard to take mental health vacation days for some people of color. How would you encourage someone to change the narrative that it is okay to take mental health vacation days, as well as disconnecting from work on those days?
That's definitely an important question. My colleagues, and I'm laughing because my colleagues and I had this conversation recently. It's extremely important. It definitely needs to be stressed. I know that, and I've actually have said it, and again, I have these uncomfortable conversations at a previous employee when I don't think it was I can't remember, one of the police shootings of an unarmed Black male happened, and the country was in an uproar. And I honestly told my supervisor that I am going to take a mental health day, because, and I said this, because of all this that's going on, it was definitely impacting my mental health. Now, I've always believed in taking mental health days, but that one was one where I actually had to come out and say it. Because of what I'm seeing, the landscape of the racial landscape of this country right now is overwhelming for me. And I am going to take a mental health day. And I think that we need to be upfront and be honest, when we need a mental health day. I think it's important. It's definitely something we need to do. Now, as far as disconnected, I'm working on that one. As far as with the work, and what I do is, and what I encourage others to do, we definitely have to do it, and it's one that I'm working on. I'm better than I was, if you ask my husband, as far as separating from work when I'm home. However, I do find, particularly in the helping field, it can be definitely overwhelming and desperately needed.
Dr. Allison, I got a question that was sent to me. How can I be an ally to my Black colleagues and students? If someone describes an experience I can't relate to, what is something helpful I can say or do to show support?
Your answer was in that question when you just said something I can't relate to. And it's okay to say that. I can't relate to that experience. I empathize with you. I'm here for you. What can I do to kind of help, if there's anything I can do? But the first thing to say that, I hear you. I empathize with you. I can't relate, but I'm here. And I think that's one thing we definitely have to do is say that, because the worst thing you do is, oh, I understand, I know what you're going through. You don't. But exactly what you just said, you can't relate to it. Say it. I can't relate to that experience. And I hate to hear that you went through this or that you're going to, but make it very clear that you are an ally. And I think that's really important, because we do get too many people trying to say, oh, I know. No, you don't. So yeah, just be honest and open.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, we've got another question. Are there tools that we can share with our campus communities that can help facilitate conversations?
Absolutely. I will be honest with you. This platform is one way. Also, when I mentioned about the McNeese chapter of NAACP, it was a panel discussion, and it was different people. I think there was a police officer, there were, of course, myself, another mental health provider, and I can't remember what the other person did, but something with mental health. Have those panel discussions, and make it a relaxing conversation. We need to have those conversations on campus. And as I said in the presentation, I attended McNeese. I had these really strange experiences. I mean, I transferred in from Los Angeles, and when I got to campus for the first time, and I think it was the old union, they call it, I kid you not, all the Black students were on this side, all the white students here, and they were separated by stairs. Now, mind you, the same people are in class together, have conversations, but when they congregate to that area, there's a separation. And I think that we need to have conversations, panel discussions, in classes. And actually in classes, I think professors need to have conversations. I can remember at LSU having a class, it was human oppression diversity. I learned a lot. Some of it was hurtful. I can remember an activity where we anonymously put down questions. No one knew that the professor was actually going to type it up. And for next class, that was our discussion. And to hear some of the most horrific things from students who were going to be social workers providing services to African American, it was heart-wrenching, but it opened up a more in-depth conversation. And I think those are needed, particularly in the academic arena.
Dr. Allison, do you see that question in the chat?
I do. I didn't catch the bottom of it, and I'm scared to click something. I don't want to lose it. If you can read
okay, I can
Yeah.
read it. I can read it. It seems that our Black colleagues have a lot on their plate regarding expectations and time commitments. Do you have any suggestions of how we could share the burden?
That's a good one. I can definitely empathize with that one. And we do. We have a lot of expectations, but I tell everybody, and I had to learn this the hard way, I can only do what I can do. And I think those expectations, some of them are far-fetched, and I don't feel like they are put on our non-Black colleagues. But I've always learned we can do what we can do, because, and I had someone that wasn't in the field told me that if you die today from stress, anxiety, trying to meet all these unrealistic expectations, someone's going to replace you the next day. What I say is do what you can do it well, because again, it doesn't matter what it is you do, those expectations are going to continue to increase. And it's hard on us. Someone said the other day, and I got offense to it, but a colleague said, no, it's not to be offensive about. My daughter just graduated law school. So we went somewhere we mutually go to, and she says, you guys are such, and it came from a white person, you guys are such overachievers. And so I took offense to it, because would the same be said of a white mother-daughter team that want to be successful? We work hard in life. Why are we considered, the way it says, overachievers? So no matter what we do, those expectations, we're never going to meet them. So just do what you can do as a professional, do it well, and trust me, your works will speak for you.
All right, I'm just going to check with the other moderators. And Dr. Allison, does anybody see any final questions in the chat?
I do not.
Okay. All right, well, once again, Dr. Allison, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I think this was a very productive presentation, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. Thank you, Katie, as well.